The shadows are my refuge, and the night is my ally. Centuries have passed, but my desire remains eternal. Julian Moreau did not believe in curses. As an antiquarian, he spent years dealing with rare manuscripts, forgotten objects, and stories that seemed too beautiful to be real. But when a mysterious diary fell into his hands, something inside him changed. The black leather felt softer than it should, the ink still fresh, as if the author were still writing. Despite having been dead for over a century, the name on the first page made his blood run cold. Mircalla Karnstein, or as the world knew her, Carmilla. The accounts claimed that the vampire had been destroyed, that her thirst for blood had come to an end. But as Julian progressed through the pages, he uncovered details that should never have been revealed. Had Carmilla never truly been destroyed? Was the official story a lie? And what if that book was not just a record of the past, but a living connection to something that should never have been disturbed? In this video, you will be drawn into a terrifying mystery. We will explore Carmilla's lost diary, her victims, her transformation, and the hidden truth about her death or her survival. But beware, some stories should never be read. Some pages should never be turned. And when you hear the final revelation, you may realize that the end was never truly the end. The antiquarian's hands trembled as he held the small black leather notebook. The air in the library felt denser, as if an ancient shadow lurked between the shelves. Symbols were engraved on the cover, markings nearly erased by time, and the scent of aged pages carried with it an inexplicable chill. He could not say where the diary had come from, only that it had appeared among the belongings of an old countess whose lineage traced back through centuries of mystery. When he opened the first page, the ink seemed fresh, as if the owner of these writings still lived to continue her story. The shadows are my refuge, and the night is my ally. Centuries have passed, but my desire remains eternal. The elegant, flowing handwriting seemed to dance across the yellowed page. Julian felt a shiver run down his spine, for each word carried an unknown weight. If this diary was real, then everything known about Carmilla could be wrong. He turned the pages with trembling fingers, absorbing every fragment of a story long buried. The account spoke of lust, thirst, and darkness, a testimony to the life and desires of a vampire whose name still echoed in forbidden legends. History's records claimed that Carmilla had been destroyed, that her body had been reduced to ashes, and that her curse had finally come to an end. But this diary said otherwise. The words written here were not those of a creature about to die, but of someone who remained lurking, watching, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The most unsettling part was the final passage, scribbled in haste, as if a warning to those who dared to read. What they killed was not me, only a shadow, an empty shell. I am still here. The antiquarian shut the book with a snap, his heart hammering in his chest. If the diary was real, it meant that Carmilla had never truly been destroyed. Her essence could have survived through the centuries, moving between bodies, hiding in shadows, seducing and enchanting new victims. The mere fact that this book existed implied something terrifying. Someone, somewhere, still carried her secret. The questions piled up. Could it be that, amidst the mists of time, Carmilla was alive, merely waiting to begin her cycle of desire and destruction once more? At that moment, Julian Moreau realized that this diary was not just a record of the past, but a harbinger of the future. If the words written within were true, then blood still flowed through her immortal veins. The horror grew as he felt the presence of that story surrounding him, as if the very spirit of the vampire lurked among the shelves. Who else knew of this book's existence? Who else would believe in it? And, above all, who would have the courage to keep reading? The night was thick, and the yellowish glow of the candle cast elongated shadows on the stone walls of the old library. Julian hesitated before opening the diary again, feeling a chill at the back of his neck, as if he were being watched. The book had been found in an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of Styria, hidden inside a worm-eaten wooden chest. Among the rusted jewels and decaying fabrics, that small black leather volume seemed surprisingly well preserved, as if time had not dared to touch it. The collector who brought it claimed that the estate had once belonged to a forgotten countess, a woman who had mysteriously disappeared more than a century ago. At first, the antiquarian believed it was merely a period diary, perhaps a romantic account or trivial memories of a young aristocrat. But a single glance was enough to realize that there was something unsettling about those pages. The leather of the cover felt strangely soft, almost pulsating to the touch, and the words written within had a hypnotic quality. The entries fluctuated between passionate confessions and haunting descriptions of nights when the author claimed to wander in search of something or someone. Some passages were smudged, as if tear drops of something thicker had stained the parchment. In the accounts, the writer spoke of an insatiable desire, of a thirst that no wine or fruit could quench. She described nights when she slipped through the stone corridors of a castle, her heart beating in a rhythm that was not human. She mentioned names erased by time, young people who had enchanted her, who had made her feel alive, only to be forgotten when hunger grew stronger. The most disturbing part was the way she spoke of her own body, as if she were imprisoned within it, as if her soul were torn between love and necessity. Julian turned the page and found a name that made his blood run cold. Laura, the name of the young victim who, according to historical records, had been seduced and terrorized by Carmilla before her destruction. But the tone of the words was not that of a predator boasting about her prey, it was almost a lament. She was the only one who made me hesitate, the only one I wished to keep by my side forever. But hunger is a monster that never falls silent. The antiquarian felt his stomach churn. Could it be possible that the vampire had loved that girl? He closed the book and took a deep breath, trying to dispel the growing unease spreading through his mind. Something inside him screamed that he should destroy that diary, that he should never allow its words to poison another soul. But a greater part dominated by fascination and fear knew that he could not stop reading. He needed to know the truth. He needed to understand whether that book was a relic of the past or a warning of something yet to come. Julian's eyes ran over the first pages of the diary, his breathing in rhythm with the distant sound of rain against the window. The name Mircalla Karnstein appeared for the first time in ornamented letters, like a signature marked by time. I was baptized with this name, but over the centuries, many have called me by others. Among them, Carmilla. He reread the sentence multiple times, feeling the strange presence of that woman echoing through the words. The ink, though old, seemed to pulse with moisture, as if it had been written just the night before. Who was this creature before the curse? The diary described Mircalla's childhood in an isolated fortress surrounded by dense forests and misty mountains. The daughter of a noble family, she had grown up among cold halls and stone corridors, under the stern gaze of tutors who educated her to be the perfect aristocrat. But there was something unsettling in her memories. The account of a sickly, reclusive mother whose beauty remained untouched despite the years, and servants who vanished without explanation. At night, Mircalla claimed to hear whispers coming from the walls, calling her name in forgotten tongues. Since childhood, she had known that her family harbored a secret. At 17, the transformation happened. The handwriting became frantic in this section, as if Carmilla were trying to relive the moments leading up to her rebirth. I remember the night my heart beat for the last time as a human. The moon was full, and the wind howled through the towers. The door to my room opened on its own, and a figure emerged from the darkness. Its eyes were like slits of amber, and its voice whispered promises I did not understand. Julian felt a shiver creep up his spine. Was this the moment when Carmilla ceased to be a mortal young woman and became an eternal predator? The diary narrated the instant when cold lips touched her skin, a kiss that burned like ice and tore her soul away in ecstasy and pain. When I opened my eyes again, the world was no longer the same. The air smelled of iron, and my body no longer belonged to the light. Mircalla Karnstein died that night, but Carmilla was born, condemned to walk in the shadows and desire what she could never fully satiate. However, there was one curious detail Julian noticed. The vampire did not mention the name of the one who had transformed her. It was as if this entity had been deliberately forgotten, or as if her memory had been fragmented. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process what he had just read. Every page of the diary seemed charged with an unsettling energy, as if the book itself were alive. He realized that Carmilla was not just a vampire, she was an enigma. Her origin was shrouded in mystery, her transformation surrounded by gaps. Who had created her? Why did her family seem already entangled with the supernatural even before her transformation? The questions piled up, and he knew there was only one path forward: to keep reading. Julian turned the page and found a sudden shift in the tone of the writing. The sentences were shorter, urgent, as if Carmilla were reliving every second of her transformation. The pain was unbearable, a fire that began in my chest and spread through my veins. I was dying and being reborn at the same time. My skin burned with a cold that did not come from the night, but from something deeper, something that tore me away from humanity. Julian shuddered. He had read about vampire transformations before, but nothing so visceral. The diary narrated the exact moment when Mircalla Karnstein disappeared, giving way to the eternal creature that would take her place. In the first moments, Carmilla did not understand what had happened. Her skin was pale as marble, her senses sharpened to the point where she could hear the beating wing of a moth on the other side of the room. She rose, trembling, and saw her own reflection in an ornate mirror. I was still me, but I wasn't. My eyes were bottomless pits, and my breathing no longer existed. The horror of realization struck with overwhelming force. Her lips were stained with a deep red. Blood. She did not remember biting anyone, but the metallic taste betrayed the truth. In the following days, Carmilla wandered the corridors of the castle, consumed by a thirst that left her feverish. She was afraid of herself. She feared touching people, feared looking into the eyes of her servants. But the hunger grew, throbbing, until the first victim appeared, a maid who had always served her faithfully. I tried to resist, I swear I did. But when her skin brushed against mine, the desire was stronger than any human bond. My instinct took control, and in an instant, I was upon her, feeling the fragile pulse beneath my lips. Carmilla described the sensation as a cruel ecstasy, a pleasure that filled her with both guilt and relief at the same time. Julian realized that, unlike other creatures who embrace darkness without hesitation, Carmilla fought against her own hunger. She did not want to be a monster, but what else could she be? The diary mentioned nights when she locked herself in her room, digging her nails into the wood of the bed, biting her own lips until they bled to hold back the impulse. But time always won. The thirst always returned. I was no longer my own. Hunger was my new master. She stopped seeing humans as equals and began to see them as fleeting shadows, warm bodies destined to silence her pain for a few hours. Julian closed the book for a moment, feeling his own heart pounding. Carmilla was not just a predator, she was a tormented soul, trapped between desire and regret. He knew stories of ruthless, bloodthirsty vampires, but he had never read anything like this. What was worse? Being a killer without remorse, or one who mourned every death? He felt a strange weight in his chest and, against all rational instinct, turned the page. Carmilla's story was far from over. The handwriting in the diary changed once again. If before the words were written in despair, now they flowed across the page with an almost poetic tone. I learned that hunger was easier to endure when accompanied by desire. Fear tore the victims apart, but devotion made them sublime. Carmilla discovered that she did not need to hunt like a wild beast. She could choose her victims, envelop them in her charm, make them surrender even before the first sip of blood. The game of seduction was her new weapon, and few could resist it. The diary's accounts were filled with names forgotten by time, young women who had fallen under her spell. They were innocent maidens, often daughters of nobility, brought into castles and palaces under the pretense of friendship and companionship. Carmilla surrounded them with kindness, enigmatic smiles, and subtle touches that made their skin shiver. The loneliness of the nights became a poison, and I was the cure they longed for. But when passion blurred into obsession, the outcome was inevitable. At the height of enchantment, when the young women could no longer imagine their lives without Carmilla, that was when she devoured them. However, there was something curious about the way the vampire described her encounters. It was not mere predation. She loved each of her victims, if only for a moment. The diary revealed a disturbing truth. Carmilla needed to fall in love in order to kill. Without the bond, the blood had no taste, the hunger was not satisfied. Each new girl was a flame that burned intensely before being extinguished. But one of them was different. Laura. The name returned once more, entwined with the vampire's deepest confessions. Laura was special. Her soul shone like a pale star, and for a moment, I wanted to believe that I could keep her by my side without destroying her. But Carmilla knew this was a lie. Hunger always won, and Laura began to wither, to grow ill, to have nightmares of a dark-haired shadow stealing her life away each night. Carmilla watched the girl's suffering, and, for the first time in centuries, hesitated. It was not thirst that tormented her, but the fear that she was feeling something real. She had never loved before. And if loving meant letting Laura live, then perhaps Carmilla was willing to lose. Julian felt his chest tighten as he read those words. Carmilla was a monster, but there was something terribly human in her pain. She was not like the vampires he knew, those who only hunted and killed without emotion. She was a prisoner of her own desire. And what if Laura had not been killed? What if Carmilla had, somehow, resisted? The young antiquarian felt his heart pounding. He was close to a revelation, something that could change everything he knew about this story. Julian turned the page, and the once elegant handwriting became erratic, fragmented, as if written in haste. Carmilla's end was near, but the words narrated a different conclusion from what historical records claimed. According to known accounts, Laura and her father, aided by a general and a monk, discovered the vampire's identity and destroyed her. Her tomb was desecrated, her head severed from her body, a stake driven through her chest. But in the diary, Carmilla told another version. And this version did not end with her death. I saw the fear in her eyes. Laura knew before I even said it. She knew that I was the reason for her restless nights, her fever, and her dark dreams. But fear did not erase love. When I was discovered, it was not terror I saw in her gaze-eyed, was the despair of someone about to lose what they most desire. Carmilla did not fight when they came for her. She allowed herself to be found, as if expecting an inevitable punishment. But there was one important detail. She never wrote about the moment the stake pierced her heart. Julian frowned. The vampire narrated every instant of that night, the way she was torn from Laura's arms, the sound of murmured prayers as the men sealed her fate. But when the decisive moment arrived, the narrative simply stopped. The following words were disjointed, almost illogical. It was not the end. The blood moves. The shadow escapes. I am still here. The antiquarian felt a shiver creep up his spine. It was as if the diary had been interrupted, or worse, as if Carmilla had been unable to tell what really happened. He flipped through the next pages, expecting to find an ending. But all that remained were scribbles, strange symbols, and nonsensical phrases. One single sentence, repeated multiple times, like a desperate mantra. What they killed was not me. What did this mean? Had they only destroyed an empty body? A fragment of Carmilla? If the diary was true, then the official story was wrong. She never died. Julian stepped away from the table, his breathing heavy. If Carmilla had not been destroyed, where was she now? If she had escaped, it meant that her hunger still burned somewhere, waiting for a new victim. But an even more terrifying thought crept into his mind. What if she was still hunting? If the diary had resurfaced after so long, perhaps it was a warning, a call to those who dared to remember her name. Julian closed the diary, but the feeling of something unfinished lingered in the air. He ran a hand over his face, trying to process everything he had read. If Carmilla was never destroyed, what had happened to her? Why had her diary vanished for more than a century only to resurface now? Questions piled up like shadows around him, and a subtle unease began to gnaw at him. He felt watched. The apartment, once safe, now felt oppressive. Every dark corner seemed deeper, as if something were waiting there, just watching. He decided to research recent records, soon explained cases, unusual deaths that might bear the mark of a predator who fed on the blood and souls of her victims. And that was when he found something. In recent years, there had been strange reports of women disappearing in the region of Styria, Austria, exactly where Carmilla had supposedly been destroyed. The patterns were always the same. Young women describing nightmares of a woman of supernatural beauty, a shadowy figure who visited them at night. Some were found pale, drained of strength, murmuring names no one could decipher. Others simply vanished without a trace. Julian felt a chill run down his spine. The descriptions were identical to those in the diary. The cycle was repeating. Perhaps it had never been broken. And if Carmilla was still alive, it meant her hunger had never ceased. One recent account spoke of a mysterious woman who appeared in a village near a ruined castle. She was mesmerizing, her skin pale as ivory, her eyes carrying an ancient glow, as if they had seen centuries pass. The most disturbing detail? Her name was Mircalla. He looked at the diary on the table and noticed something he hadn't before. The leather seemed darker than when he had first touched it, smoother, softer, as if it were regenerating. His heart pounded in his chest. What if this diary was not just an ancient object? What if it was a link, a means for Carmilla to communicate with the present? If the book had found its way to him, perhaps it was not by chance. Julian felt an icy shiver run down his spine. What if Carmilla knew he was reading? What if, by opening its pages, he had done more than just uncover her story? Perhaps, without realizing it, he had awakened something that should never have been disturbed. The silence in the apartment was absolute. And then, he felt it. A sweet fragrance in the air, a faint whisper behind him, and the unsettling certainty that he was no longer alone. The clock struck 3 in the morning. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, and Julian did not dare to move. The sweet fragrance still lingered in the air, of floral scent, mixed with something metallic, subtle, but unmistakable. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to slow his breathing, but then he heard it. A delicate sound, like fingers gliding over paper. The diary. The pages were turning on their own. The black leather trembled in the candlelight, and a cold breeze swept through the room, like a whisper from ancient times passing through him. Julian felt every muscle in his body tense. He wanted to run, but his legs were rooted to the floor. He looked at the book and saw that a new page had been revealed. His name was written on it, Julian Moreau. His blood ran cold. The diary was not just a record of the past. It was being written now. The words appeared before his eyes, an elegant, winding handwriting forming slowly. I know you have found me. I know you have read me. Now, I read you. The young antiquarian felt the air leave his lungs. He was not merely studying Carmilla. Carmilla was studying him. Terror seized his mind. What if opening that diary had been an invitation? What if every page read was an offering? A silent ritual bringing Carmilla back into the world of the living. Everything he had believed to be legend now felt terrifyingly real. Julian stepped away from the table, trying to ignore the sensation that someone was watching him from the darkest corner of the room. But when he lifted his eyes to the reflection in the mirror beside the bookshelf, he saw something that made his heart stop. A female silhouette standing behind him, her eyes glowing like molten gold. The diary snapped, and the candle flickered violently. Julian turned with a jolt, but there was nothing there. Only the diary, open, waiting for him to continue. The apartment had never felt so small. He needed to get out. Now, with trembling hands, he grabbed the book and shoved it into a drawer, as if he could bury it in oblivion. But he knew it would make no difference. The diary had found him. And things like this never cease to exist just because we choose to ignore them. The clock chimed once more. The scent disappeared. The air became still again. But Julian knew something had been awakened. And Carmilla's story did not end that night. In fact, perhaps it never truly ended. Perhaps, somewhere between shadows and whispers, she was merely waiting for the next name to be written in her pages.